Hi there and welcome to my new podcast. It bears the title Endgame for Globalism. Are you interested in the topic? If so, then I recommend reading Dr. Polleits BOOM BUST REPORT. All information is available at boombustreport.com. And now let's get started with Endgame for Globalism. Last Friday, January the 30th, 2026, there was a massive price slide in gold and silver. The gold price fell by just over 10% compared to the previous day, silver by about 28%. Until last Friday, however, prices had recovered. Gold traded at $4,970 per ounce, up 1.5% on a weekly basis, and up 9.4% on a 12-month basis. Silver stood at $77.8 per ounce, up 5% against last week and down 4.7% against last month. The sell-off in the markets also affected Bitcoin. Its price fell by 16% against last week. The prices of other cryptocurrencies went down strongly as well. Temporary losses, albeit far less dramatic, also occurred in the stock markets, especially among IT stocks. The perceived uncertainty has likely risen noticeably among many investors, and many are now worried that the whole thing could turn into a downward spiral, a real crash. What should we make of such concerns? To answer this question, I need to go a bit further and start with the observation that the last decades in the Western world have stood under the ideological heading of globalism. What is meant by that? The word globalism is indeed interpreted differently by different people. Therefore, a clarification is important. By globalism, I understand a political program according to which people should no longer shape their destinies on the planet in a system of free markets in a self-determined way, but rather that people's way of life should be coordinated and directed worldwide from above, from a central authority, such as a council of heads of state and government, an enlightened global elite. The best-known think tanks of the supporters of globalism, let us call them globalists, are the World Economic Forum, WEF, and the United Nations. Above all, the topics propagated by the WEF have long become powerful political guidelines, such as climate policy, green policy, open border policies, mass immigration, digitization, especially digital vaccination passports and central bank digital currency, public-private partnerships, transhumanism, in short, everything that falls under the term Great Reset. From a theoretical perspective, the roots of globalism can be identified in collectivist, neo-socialist and also neo-Marxist doctrines. And even though there are different nuances of globalism, its central objective is to push back, abolish the free market system or the little that remains of it today, to expand the influence of the state or of special interest groups that know how to use the state for their purposes. Globalists deliberately avoid the old battle cry of socialists, Marxists like expropriation of the expropriators. Instead, they rely on appealing promises like a cleaner environment, fairer distribution, inclusion, etc. Yet they want to achieve the same goal: to bury the free market system, to erode private property beyond recognition, to help a leadership elite achieve omnipotence, to establish something like a feudal world dictatorship. With the election of US President Donald J. Trump, however, globalism in the United States of America has suffered a severe setback. This is evident, for example, also on the international level, in that the US withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement in January 2025, and in January 2026, the United States left 66 international organizations, including the World Health Organization, WHO, and raising doubts about the continued existence of NATO. The voters in the US now want their new government to change the previous course and renounce globalism. The Trump administration has already realigned the interests of the US with far-reaching consequences. From now on, the focus is primarily on the Western Hemisphere. And something else has happened. On January the 30th, 2026, the US Department of Justice published the most comprehensive collection of the Epstein files to date. More than 3 million documents, 180,000 photos, 2,000 videos. Already now, shortly after publication, the revelations are proving to be extremely shocking, and one can certainly assume that everything is actually much worse than what the published documents indicate. Not everything is yet publicly accessible, or much has been redacted. And already now the first heads are rolling. There are resignations. The dark machinations of the powerful Epstein network, which has spread worldwide and consists of politicians, bureaucrats, corporate executives, scientists, artists, literati, media representatives, are now, it seems, coming to light. And by holding the guilty parties accountable and publicly discrediting them, and hopefully also prosecuting them criminally, globalism is losing its supporters and cheerleaders and is about to tank, just like the Titanic, which slid its hull on an iceberg, is filling with water and sinks. In fact, it may well be that globalism and the globalists are now suffering a severe, perhaps even final defeat. That, as a consequence, the globalist institutions, think here, for example, of the United Nations, the European Union, the European Central Bank, the Euro single currency, are coming under scrutiny, perhaps not surviving. However, the globalists will not lay down their arms without a fight. After their defeat in the US, they have taken refuge in Europe, in London, Berlin, Paris, Brussels, so to speak, and are building their defense lines here. One of their main concerns is controlling the public discourse. For they know that free speech by people, their unhindered discussion in the public space, that is, the enlightening search for truth and the answers one inevitably arrives at through unhindered speech and free communication, seals their defeat. In Europe, therefore, the globalists will try to defend their position even more strongly, to impose even more censorship on the population, to regulate social media by the state in order to retain and defend control over minds, also by interfering in free elections. January the 30th, 2026 might therefore have been the beginning of a turning point with enormous far-reaching implications. Perhaps in a few months or quarters, looking back at current events, one can truly speak of the beginning of the crash of globalism. For investors, there are therefore good reasons to think about what consequences all this will have for the economy and financial markets, for stock prices, interest rates, gold and silver prices, the free capital flows around the world. In the new issue of Dr. Polleits Boom and Bust Report, which will be published on February the 12th, I will, among other things, provide some assessments on this. So if you want to know more, read Dr. Polleits Boom and Bust Report, written for investors who want not only to protect but also increase their capital in turbulent times. All information can be found at boombustreport.com. Thank you very much for your attention.